Get ready, guys, because tonight we're diving headfirst into the scorching, olive oil-slicked world of ancient Greece, a civilization famous for incredible things like philosophy, democracy, and statues that, well, didn't really believe in pants. But beneath all those legends of Plato, Sparta, and glittering golden temples lies a much harder truth. While ancient Greece gave us the roots of Western civilization, it also gave its average citizen a daily struggle that you'd barely survive. Today, so, before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, okay? And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Asterisk, welcome to ancient Greece, where your day begins not with an alarm clock, but with the sun turning your house into a slow cooking oven. Your home? Super modest, made of sun-dried mud bricks or rough stone. Small windows, no glass, just wooden shutters to keep out the goats and, if the gods are feeling generous, maybe a tiny breeze. No insulation, no ceiling fan, and absolutely no such thing as personal space. Unless you count the corner where the family goat doesn't sleep. You rise early, not because you're disciplined, but because it's already too hot to stay horizontal. In the summer, those stone walls absorb heat like a sponge, and by sunrise, your little house is radiating it back into your bones. In winter, the same walls turn into a freezer, and you're basically wrapped in a thin sheet, hoping not to become a frostbitten statue. You probably slept on a thin mat or a straw-stuffed mattress. No pillows, just a rolled-up cloak or maybe your arm. If you're lucky, the lice left you alone last night. But chances are, they didn't. Running water? No way. So your morning routine involves either walking to the public fountain or, if you're rural, hauling water from a nearby well. You carry it in clay jars, balanced on your shoulders, while silently praying you don't trip and shatter. A week's worth of back pain on the ground. Getting clean? Not in the morning. That's saved for the end of the day, if at all. You might just splash your face, rub some olive oil on your skin, then scrape it off with a curved metal blade. Think of it as a spa day, but without the spa, the day, or any real effect. And don't even think about privacy. Your family lives in the same room. You sleep together, eat together, and argue over who tracked mud in from the street. Because the street is also your hallway, your news feed, and your trash dump. You haven't even had breakfast yet, and your back already hurts. You're sweating, and your tunic is sticking in places no tunic should. And this is the best part of your day. Asterisk, okay, you've survived the Greek bedroom's sweatbox. Time to fuel up, right? Welcome to breakfast in ancient Greece. A meal so minimal, it makes modern intermittent fasting look like gluttony. Your first bite of the day? Barley bread. Stale, dense, and about as exciting as the dirt it was baked near. It's called maza. Made from ground barley, mixed with water, shaped into flat cakes, and left to bake either on hot stones or in the ashes of last night's fire. Think ancient granola bar, but without sweetness, texture, or joy. You might dunk it in watered down wine because, surprise, the water isn't always safe to drink. No filtration system, no boiling, no Brita pitcher in your clay pantry. So everyone from kids to elders gets a cup of wine mixed with water. Not for the buzz, but for survival. If you're wealthy, maybe you get a fig or two, some olives, or a smudge of goat cheese. But let's be honest, you're not wealthy. You're lucky if your bread isn't crawling with yesterday's flies and doesn't crack a tooth when you bite it. No coffee, no eggs, no fruit bowl, no honey, unless you live near a decent beekeeper and know how to bribe them. And don't expect to. Sit and relax. Meals are fast. No chairs, no forks, and certainly no mindful eating. You chew, you nod, and you get back to work. Oh, and if you're a woman, you don't even eat with the men. In many households, women and children eat separately, often after the males are done. So, not only is the food bad, you also get to wait your turn to be disappointed. The irony. Ancient. Greeks are the same people who gave us symposiums, banquets, and poetic odes to wine. But breakfast? That's not worth a line of verse. It's utilitarian dry, often literally burnt, and yet you chew through it like a champion, because it's the only thing standing between you and a full day of sun, labor, and arguing philosophers. Bon appetite. Just try not to crack a molar dot. Now that you've choked down your stale barley brick and a splash of wine water, it's time to freshen up. Or more accurately, fail to. Because in ancient Greece, hygiene wasn't so much about cleanliness as it was about ritual and oil. And soap? That's a fantasy reserved for future centuries. Your morning bath usually involves pouring cold water over your body at the public fountain or courtyard basin, unless you're lucky enough to live near a bathhouse, which most people aren't. There's no shampoo, no minty body wash, and no sponge. Instead, you turn to olive oil. Yes, oil. You rub it into your skin, not to moisturize, but to collect the dirt and sweat. Then you scrape it off using a strigil, a curved bronze blade that leaves you less greasy, but still a little questionable. Imagine slathering yourself in salad, dressing and then shaving it off. That's your skincare routine. And if you think that sounds glamorous, just remember everyone else is doing it too, often in communal settings, naked, loudly. Hygiene is social in ancient Greece. Privacy is not. Your teeth? No toothbrushes, no toothpaste. Maybe you rub your gums with crushed charcoal or rinse with vinegar if you're fancy, but mostly you chew on a twig and hope for the best. Body odor? Ubiquitous. Deodorant doesn't exist. Clothes are washed by beating them against stones in the river, very rarely. In short, hygiene in ancient Greece isn't about looking or smelling good. It's about appearing moderately less revolting than yesterday. Asterisk time to get dressed. Spoiler alert, your ancient Greek wardrobe is minimal at best and comically impractical. At worst, you've got two options, a chiton or a himedion. Both are basically oversized linen rectangles that you wrap and pin with a brooch or tie with a belt. It's not tailored, it's not fitted, and it absolutely wasn't designed with windy days in mind. One wrong breeze and suddenly, your whole philosophical outlook is on display. Forget underwear. It's not a thing. And brass don't exist. So, you're just hoping your pins hold, and no one notices your wardrobe shifting like a loose curtain? Footwear? If you're lucky, you own a pair of leather sandals. If not, you're barefoot. And that means a full day of walking on sun-baked stone, goat-trodden dirt, and whatever the local market has squished into the roads. Imagine strolling across a skillet in July while dodging donkey dung. That's your daily commute. Of course, there's no sun protection, no hats, unless you're a farmer or sailor, and no sunscreen because you live in 450 BCE and science hasn't been invented yet. The Aegean sun doesn't care how philosophical you are. It will roast you. By noon, your shoulders are burned, your feet are filthy, and your linen robe has stuck to you in 4 places that defy geometry. If you're a free male citizen, especially in Athens or Sparta, congratulations. You're automatically a soldier, whether you like it or not. By your teens, you're already training with wooden weapons and learning formations in the phalanx, that famous Greek battle strategy that involves standing shoulder to shoulder behind. large shields, and hoping the guy next to you doesn't trip. In Sparta, boys start military training at age 7 in the brutal Agoge system, a program that turns children into warriors by essentially starving, whipping, and isolating them until only the toughest remain. In Athens, things are gentler, but still mandatory. 2 years of training in your late teens, followed by decades of being on call. You don't get to say, "I'm more of a thinker." Even philosophers like Socrates fought in wars, and not with witty comebacks, but with actual weapons. And there's always a war. Peace is just the pause between 2 invasions. Armor? If you can afford it, you get a bronze helmet, breastplate, greaves, a round hoplon shield, and a spear. If you can't, well, try not to be in the front row. The worst part? You supply your own gear. Being a soldier is a BYOB. Bring your own bronze situation. Asterisk. If you think life as a man in ancient Greece sounds rough, just wait until you hear about being a woman. In most Greek city-states, especially Athens, women had fewer rights than a pile of decorative urns. You couldn't vote, couldn't hold office, couldn't own land outright, and rarely appeared in public without a male escort. In fact, if people saw you out too often, they might start whispering that you were a courtesan, or worse, a Spartan. Let's start with your daily routine. You wake up before sunrise to start the chores. You spin wool, weave cloth, grind grain, fetch water, bake bread, manage the slaves, if your household has any, and raise the children. You're the household CEO, but one without pay, respect, or days off. Your social life? Limited. You don't attend plays. You don't join the philosophical debates. You're not at the gymnasium. That's for naked men only. You're confined mostly to the gymnasium, the women's quarters. Education? If you're lucky, you might learn to read a bit, but mostly you're trained in domestic duties. Philosophy, rhetoric, geometry? That's for the boys. Your job is to marry well, have sons, and stay invisible while doing it. Marriage happens young, often in your early teens, to a man twice your age, arranged by your father, who treats you more like a trade agreement than a person. Love is optional. Dowries are mandatory, and when you do have children, your primary value becomes your womb. Now, Sparta was the exception. Spartan women were famously more liberated. They were educated, exercised in public, and could own property. But before you envy them too much, remember their freedom came from a state-sponsored obsession with warfare and eugenics. Your main job as a Spartan woman? Give birth to strong warriors or face disgrace. If your husband dies, you can't inherit much. You can't remarry without permission, and your options shrink faster than your social circle. Asterisk ancient Athens is hailed as the birthplace of democracy. And yes, technically that's true. But before you get too excited, let's be clear. You probably wouldn't qualify to participate. In fact, the majority of people living in Athens were completely excluded from the democratic process. To vote in the Athenian ecclesia, assembly, you had to be male, born to Athenian parents, and a citizen over 18. That means women, foreigners, called medics, slaves, and children, who made up nearly 90% of the population, had no political voice whatsoever. That's not democracy for the people. That's democracy for a very specific club of sunburned men in sandals. If you met the criteria, though, you didn't just vote. You were expected to participate constantly. Laws were proposed, debated, and passed in huge assemblies of thousands of citizens. There were no career politicians. Every eligible man was part legislator, part jury member, and part overconfident. Amateur. You could even be randomly chosen to serve in powerful positions, like running the treasury or serving on a jury through a lottery system, which sounds thrilling until you remember there were no qualifications. Your fishmonger might oversee. military logistics one day. Your uncle, who still believes in sea monsters, might judge a murder trial tomorrow. And if someone got too powerful, too popular, or just annoyed people the wrong way, ostracism. Once a year, citizens could write a name on a broken piece of pottery, an ostracon, and vote to exile that person for 10 years. No trial, no defense. Just go away. You're getting too famous. In ancient Greece, slavery wasn't just accepted, it was expected. Even modest households had at least one slave. Not because the family was wealthy, but because slavery was so deeply woven into society that it felt as normal as sandals and sunburn. The idea that someone might not own another human being? Practically unthinkable. Slaves weren't a specific race or ethnicity. They came from conquered lands, prisoners of war, or a few were kidnapped and sold. It was a thriving, brutal market, and business was always good. If you lived in Athens, your slave likely did everything. Cooked your meals, fetched your water, cleaned your home, cared for your children, carried your shopping, and stood silently during dinner. Some even handled business affairs or managed the household while the citizen owner lounged at the symposium, sipping diluted wine and debating abstract concepts like justice. Irony level maximum. In the silver mines of Lorien, slaves, including children, labored in horrifying conditions, crawling through narrow shafts in total darkness, inhaling toxic dust, and dying slowly for the sake of coins and civic pride. Even philosophers like Aristotle, yes, that Aristotle, justified slavery as natural and necessary. According to him, some people were slaves by nature. Enlightening, isn't it? Asterisk feeling unwell in ancient Greece? That's unfortunate, because unless you live next door to Hippocrates himself, your healthcare plan includes some vague herbs, divine intervention, and a lot of wishful thinking. Let's start with the basics. There are no hospitals as we know them. If you're sick or injured, you stay home. Maybe a neighbor knows a thing or two about poultices. Maybe a relative remembers a prayer to Asclepius, the god of healing. Maybe your local temple has a snake you can pet for spiritual comfort. That's about it. The most famous Greek doctors were really a mix of herbalist, philosopher, and gambler. They believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to them, illness was caused by an imbalance in these fluids. So, if you had a fever, too much blood time to drain it. Coughing, too much phlegm, try fasting. Melancholy, that's black bile. Maybe take a walk or stare at the sea dramatically. Most treatments were based on trial, error, and garlic. Did it work? Sometimes. Did it hurt? Almost always. Surgery? Rare, terrifying, and generally a last resort. Without anesthesia or antiseptics, even a simple cut could go septic and kill you. Tools included iron knives, bone saws, and prayers. Lots of prayers. Midwives handled childbirth, which was dangerous even on the best days. Mortality rates for women and infants were tragically high. But hey, at least they believed in rest, clean air, and a balanced diet. So, there's that. Ancient Greek medicine gave us the Hippocratic Oath, but it also gave us treatments like drink boiled cabbage water. So yes, healthcare in ancient Greece. Mostly herbs, hope, and hang on tight. Asterisk in ancient Greece, theater wasn't just entertainment. It was a civic duty, a religious ritual, and sometimes a full-contact sport for the soul. Let's start with the good part. Theater was free for citizens. Assuming you weren't a woman, slave, or foreigner, in which case, good luck seeing anything. You'd file into an enormous open-air theater carved into a hillside, like the great theater of Dionysus in Athens, shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other sweaty citizens. And you'd be there all day. Seriously, all day. No intermission, no snacks, and certainly no bathroom breaks, unless you counted a bush on the hillside. If you showed up late or acted out, you weren't just frowned at, you could be fined. The performances themselves? Wild. Tragedies were emotionally gutting. Murder, madness, war. Gods destroying families because of one bad decision made 3 generations ago. You didn't come to laugh. You came to weep in unison. Then came the comedies, which weren't exactly light-hearted family fare. These plays mocked politicians, philosophers, entire cities, and bodily functions with stunning precision. Imagine if Saturday Night Live and a college debate had a baby, then dressed it in a giant phallic costume and sent it on stage. Actors wore towering masks, platform shoes, and exaggerated costumes. All male, of course, even for women's roles. The chorus sang, danced, and shouted commentary like an ancient Greek version of Twitter, only louder and wearing tunics. And this wasn't passive viewing. The audience was loud. They booed, hissed, threw things, and argued mid-performance. Theater was democracy with stage lights. You survived your tragic all-day theater binge. Now you wander into the agora, the bustling heart of the city, and stumble right into a man wearing a cloak, no shoes, and asking strangers, "What is justice?" Welcome to philosophy. It's everywhere, and it's not optional. In ancient Greece, particularly in Athens, philosophy was the local sport, and the champions were names we now associate with world-changing ideas: Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Back then, though, they were just eccentric men who talked a lot and made other people feel stupid. Take Socrates. The man made a career out of asking questions that led nowhere and dismantling people's confidence in their own opinions. You might be minding your own business, buying olives or petting a stray goat, and he'd appear. Do you believe in truth? I guess. What is truth? Cue 3 hours of mental spiral and a desire to move to Sparta. He never wrote anything down. His student Plato did that. But Socrates left a lasting impression, partly because Athens eventually executed him for being too annoying. Officially, it was corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods. But let's be honest, he probably just wouldn't stop asking questions during dinner. Philosophy wasn't a cozy academic hobby. It was loud, confrontational, and weirdly athletic. Debates happened in public spaces. They were spontaneous, intense, and often ended in hurt feelings or deep existential crises. No microphones, just voices, hands, and enough ego to fill the Parthenon. And if you thought you could just watch, think again. Philosophers loved drawing in random bystanders. You didn't walk past Plato's academy. You were absorbed into it. You said one thing slightly wrong and suddenly became the day's example of unexamined life. Even kids weren't safe. So after everything, the sun-baked homes, the barley-bread breakfasts, the sandal-blistered treks, the wars, plagues, gods, and goat-related traumas, let's ask the question plainly. Would you last a single day in ancient Greece? Honestly, no. You'd fold before lunch. The heat, the diet, the constant threat of war or divine punishment would wipe that Instagrammable toga fantasy right off your face. You're not used to hauling water before breakfast or squatting over a hole in the ground. Next to a temple goat, you'd miss your running water, your aspirin, and your right to complain without being exiled by pottery shard. You might love the idea of living among marble statues, brilliant philosophers, and epic poets. But guess what? Those were the 1% of ancient Greece. For everyone else, it was backbreaking labor, limited rights, and frequent funerals. Your democracy? Only if you're a male citizen. Your medicine? Garlic and hope. Your gods? Frequently furious. Your social media? A guy yelling in the agora about justice while waving a fish. And yet, for all of that, the Greeks endured. They built temples that still stand, wrote plays we still perform, debated ideas we still wrestle with, and laid the groundwork for everything from astronomy to ethics. They didn't just survive hardship. They created civilization while sweating. Through it, you wouldn't last, but they did. Not because life was easy, but because they found ways to make meaning in a world full of chaos. They questioned everything, fought constantly, wrote beautifully, died young, and still somehow shaped the modern world. So no, you probably wouldn't make it past your first sunstroke, goat bite, or unsolicited philosophy lesson in the street. But if you did, if you adapted, endured, and listened closely, you'd find yourself standing among some of the most passionate, resilient, and brilliantly flawed people history has ever known. And they wouldn't judge you for struggling. They'd just hand you a tunic, point to the amphora, and say, "Good, now carry that up a hill." Asterisk, our story now shifts to another time, to Ramon Britannia. It began with a death and a betrayal. Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe in what is now eastern England, had played the Roman game well. He had walked a tightrope for years, ruling as a client king under the shadow of Rome. He had wealth, autonomy, and peace so long as he stayed useful to the empire. But when he died around 60 AD, he left behind a will that was meant to protect his people. He named the Roman emperor as co-heir alongside his two young daughters, hoping this gesture of loyalty would secure their safety and sovereignty. Was wrong. Rome did not honor the will. Rome didn't negotiate. Rome took. Without hesitation, the Roman authorities annexed the Iceni kingdom outright. Their soldiers stormed in and claimed everything: lands, livestock, homes, and treasures. But the theft of wealth wasn't the worst offense. It was what they did next that turned a political insult into a personal hell. They flogged the queen Boudica in public, not just to humiliate her, but to send a message: you are nothing. And if that wasn't enough, they violated her daughters in front of her. This wasn't just a crackdown. It was psychological warfare, the kind meant to break a people's spirit. But it didn't break Boudica. It forged her. Rome believed it had crushed a minor tribal woman beneath its boot. What it had done was awaken a lioness, a queen who'd take her pain and reshape it into vengeance, a mother whose rage would soon set cities ablaze, a woman who would remind Rome that even empires bleed. Word of the atrocity spread quickly. Through Britannia, other tribes listened. They remembered their own humiliations, their own land losses, their own sons killed in Roman campaigns. Rome thought the tribes divided, scattered. But in that moment, they had one thing in common: Boudica's fury. What began with Rome violating one queen would soon end with the empire reeling in fear. They had broken a treaty, broken a family, and in doing so, broken the illusion of Roman invincibility in Britannia. This wasn't just a mistake. It was the spark that would ignite one of the most ferocious revolts Rome ever faced. If Rome expected Boudica to fade into silence, they misunderstood everything about her. Boudica wasn't born to obey. She was born to lead. Described by Roman historians, who rarely complimented their enemies as tall, fierce, with flaming red hair cascading down to her waist, in a voice that sliced through crowds like a war horn. She wasn't just a queen by blood. She was a symbol. And now she was a threat. Roman brutality had tried to erase her dignity, her children's future, and her people's pride. But Boudica refused to be a victim. She understood what Rome feared most wasn't an army. It was unity. And so she began to forge it, one tribe at a time. First, the Trinobantes. They had once been powerful before Rome crushed them under taxes, land seizures, and slave labor. When Boudica spoke, she didn't speak like a diplomat. She spoke like a warrior mother, scarred but unbroken. She reminded them of their ancestors, of their gods, and of the earth they no longer owned. Her pain was their pain, her rage theirs too. Then the other tribes began to listen. Icorel Talvi, Icoranovi, even some of the Brigantes. Her cause was no longer about vengeance. It became a holy mission to cleanse Britannia of Roman arrogance. She didn't promise safety. She promised glory and death with honor if it came to that. And they followed her, because she did not stand behind her warriors. She rode among them, spear in hand, hair loose to the wind, eyes locked on the future. She called out the names of the raped, the enslaved, the executed. She summoned gods like Andrast, the Celtic war goddess, as her witness, and her warriors believed her when she said the gods would fight with them. She had no formal military training, no Roman strategy scrolls, but she had something deadlier, righteous fury, sharpened by betrayal, guided by purpose. And the land itself seemed to shift under her command. This wasn't rebellion. It was resurrection. The Queen Rome thought it had broken, was now the spearhead of a movement that would soon make the empire tremble. And she was just getting started. Asterisk, the Roman eagle had long soared over Britannia, but now the winds beneath its wings were changing. Boudica's fury wasn't a wildfire. It was a storm building with terrifying purpose. And storms need fuel. That fuel came from the thousands of Britons who had waited years, generations even, for someone to defy the empire. Someone to speak not in Latin, but in blood and iron. She gave them that voice that it started with war councils held under sacred groves and moonlit hills. Boudica didn't sit on a throne. She stood in the dirt with her people. She listened to the anger of tribal elders, to the sorrow of mothers, and to the chants of druids who saw omens in the sky. They all spoke of one truth: Rome had pushed too far. Now it was time to push back. Warriors from the Trinovantes brought spears, slings, and ancient battle chants. The Iceni added cavalry, swift riders with wild hair and war paint, fierce and fearless. Other tribes joined with axes, blades, and torches. Even women took up arms inspired by their queen. This wasn't just an army forming. It was a resurrection of Celtic identity. But Rome had trained legions, professional soldiers, armored, disciplined, and lethal. Boudica had to make up for that with numbers, knowledge of the land, and something Rome could never teach: hatred forged in humiliation. Soon Boudica's army swelled to tens of thousands. Farmers became warriors. Hunters became assassins. Former Roman slaves and mistreated tribal allies switched sides. These weren't soldiers who fought for pay. They fought for memory, revenge, and the right to raise children without chains. She gave a speech, her first of many. Roman historians would later record her words, albeit with their bias. But what echoes through time is clear. She vowed to win or die. There would be no surrender, no submission, no turning back. Then came the first target, Camulodunum. Once a British stronghold, now a Roman colony littered with temples, statues, and villas. The Temple of Claudius stood as an insult, a shrine to the emperor who had conquered them. To Boudica and her warriors, it was not sacred. It was a provocation, and it would be the first to fall. The tribes were no longer whispering rebellion. They were marching toward it, armed with fury, and led by a queen who refused to kneel. Camulodunum never stood a chance. The once proud Roman colony had become a symbol of everything Boudica's people despised. Its streets echoed not with tribal chants, but with Latin commands. Its buildings rose atop sacred ground and towering. Over it all was the Temple of Claudius, a marble mockery built with forced labor, praising the emperor who had subjugated the Britons. To Rome, it was a monument. To Boudica, it was a target. She gave the order. What followed wasn't a siege. It was an execution. Her army descended like a tidal wave. Roman settlers, many of them veterans who had bullied and taxed the local tribes, were caught off guard. The city had no proper walls. The few Roman soldiers stationed there were poorly prepared, expecting peace, not war. They tried to hold the temple, barricading themselves inside, believing it could endure a siege. It didn't. Within 2 days, Boudica's forces breached it. The streets ran red. They spared no one. Men, women, and children were slaughtered. Boudica's war wasn't just military. It was personal. Her warriors destroyed Roman statues, burned villas, and turned their rage onto the very symbols of occupation. The temple was set ablaze, its roof collapsing in a firestorm that lit the sky for miles. Survivors were rare, and those who did escape carried tales of horror that chilled Roman blood. The fury wasn't random. It was deliberate. These were people who had seen their homes taken, their gods mocked, their daughters sold. Now they were reclaiming what had been stolen, with interest. Roman officials sent pleas for help to Governor Suetonius, who was hundreds of miles away in Wales, suppressing another rebellion. But by the time he heard of Camulodunum's fall, it was already ash and smoke, a colony destroyed, its citizens dead, and the flame of rebellion rising higher. Boudica didn't stay to celebrate. There was no time. She knew Rome would respond, and hard, so she pressed on, knowing that each victory bought her momentum. Her next destination was a city larger, richer, and even more vulnerable, Londinium. If Rome hadn't taken her seriously before, they would now. Camulodunum was the beginning, but it wasn't revenge yet. Not until the empire's beating heart in Britannia felt the fire. Londinium was the jewel of Romang Britannia. Founded just 17 years earlier, it had grown into a thriving hub of trade and administration. Merchants from across the empire filled its markets. Officials conducted imperial business under tiled roofs. Wealth flowed through its streets like water. But as Boudica's army marched ever closer, that wealth turned into panic. Governor Suetonius, having rushed back from Wales with a small force, arrived just ahead of the rebellion. He looked at Londinium, crowded, sprawling, defenseless, and made a brutal decision. He abandoned it. The Roman legions stationed elsewhere were too far to help. Suetonius couldn't risk his limited troops in a city that couldn't be defended. So he withdrew, taking with him those who could flee. He left behind the old, the sick, the stubborn, and those too slow to believe a woman-led army could bring down Rome. They would learn otherwise. Boudica's forces swept into Londinium like a thunderclap. There were no walls to scale, no gates to breach. The city was open, and she made it bleed. Her warriors tore through streets with the rage of generations. They didn't loot. They didn't occupy. They eradicated. The killing was systematic. Roman citizens were dragged from their homes. Entire families were butchered. Some were impaled. Others burned alive in temples. No quarter was given, and no Roman symbol was spared. Villas were torched. Warehouses exploded into flame. The rising smoke could be seen from miles away, curling black against the British sky. This wasn't just a slaughter. It was a statement. The message: Rome is not invincible. Contemporary Roman sources like Tacitus and Cassius Dio estimated that tens of thousands died. Some accounts say the brutality exceeded even what occurred at Camulodunum. To Roman minds, this was not just a rebellion. It was apocalypse. And through it all rode Boudica. She did not hide behind commanders. She led on chariot, flanked by her daughters. She watched as the empire's pride crumbled beneath her. This wasn't senseless violence. To her, It was justice for what Rome had done to her family, her people, her land. And she wasn't finished, because ahead of her stood another Roman center, Verulamium. And beyond that, Rome's full retaliation. Rome had faced rebellions before. It had fought wars across continents, but never had it seen anything quite like Boudica. She wasn't a general trained in tactics. She didn't speak Latin. She didn't wear polished armor. Yet she had burned 2 Roman cities to the ground and butchered thousands, citizens and soldiers alike. And now, as Verulamium, a prosperous Romanized town northwest of Londinium, went up in flames, the empire began to panic. Word of her rampage had reached the Roman Senate. Emperor Nero himself reportedly considered withdrawing entirely from Britannia. Imagine that. An empire that spanned from the deserts of Africa to the mountains of Germania, considering retreat because of one woman with a chariot and a cause. That's how much she terrified them. Asterisk in truth, Boudica's power wasn't just in her army. It was in what she represented. Rome saw itself as unshakable, its cities as eternal, its rule as destiny. But here was a Celtic queen, once beaten and humiliated, now leading a revolt that had reduced entire Roman settlements to ash. Every new city she burned wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a psychological blow. Verulamium followed the same fate as Camulodunum and Londinium. It was rich, Romanized, and completely unfortified. Boudica's warriors slaughtered the inhabitants, destroyed temples, and leveled Roman infrastructure. Archaeological evidence today still shows a thick layer of ash beneath the modern town, a fire that raged with such intensity it left a scar in the earth. But here was the paradox. With each victory, Boudica's war machine grew heavier. Her army swelled, but supply lines thinned. Organization faltered. Drunk with success, some tribes grew careless, and Rome, known for its resilience, was regrouping. Governor Suetonius wasn't idle. He had retreated, yes, but not surrendered. He began gathering reinforcements, pulling battle-hardened legions from across the province. He sought the high ground, studied the terrain, and prepared for one decisive battle. Still, even with Roman strength rebuilding, there was one lingering fear in every soldier's heart. Could they stop her? Because Boudica wasn't just waging war. She was rewriting the story of conquest. And she was proving city after burning city that Rome could bleed and queens could strike back. The final confrontation was coming, and the empire held its breath. Fire had spread as far as it could. Now the storm had to face steel. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus had chosen his battlefield carefully. He wasn't just any Roman officer. He was a survivor. While Boudica's warriors celebrated their victories, Suetonius was calculating. He selected a narrow defile, a tight space bordered by forest and hills, where Boudica's numerical advantage would count for little. His army was small, maybe 10,000 strong, but every man was a trained killer, forged in the discipline of the legions. Boudica's force, on the other hand, was immense. Some sources claim up to 200,000 warriors marched under her banner. But they weren't soldiers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, tribal chiefs, and freedom seekers. Inspired but undisciplined, armed with fury but not formation. They believed numbers would crush Rome like a tide. They were wronged out as Boudica's army. Approached, she gave one last speech, standing atop her war chariot, flanked by her daughters. She reminded them of their suffering, of the floggings, the rapes, the stolen lands, the burnt homes. She called upon the goddess Andraste, invoked the ancestors, and vowed either victory or death. Her warriors roared in response. They believed the gods would carry them. Then the battle began. The Britons charged. They filled the field with a primal fury, but Suetonius held firm. He let them come close, packed tight in the narrow terrain. Then, with perfect timing, he unleashed the Roman counterstrike. Spears flew in tight formation, shields locked. Gladius, short Roman swords, cut deep into the confused mass. Wave after wave of Britons crashed into an iron wall, and each time they broke. Then the Romans advanced step by step, disciplined, precise, merciless. Behind the Britons, wagons and families had followed the army, expecting to witness Roman defeat. Instead, they became a fatal obstacle. The warriors couldn't retreat. Panic set in. The narrow battlefield turned into a slaughter. When the dust settled, it was over. Tens of thousands of Britons lay dead. The rebellion was shattered. The empire had bent, but not broken,